Nick, so good to see you. A really interesting topic today, how to make sure your inheritance doesn't disappear. So a surprising new study found that 42% of heirs see their net worth fall back to or below pre-inheritance levels within just 1 year. So in this study, the average inheritance was $133,000 gone in 1 year. What do you think is driving that behavior?
Yeah, a lot of it is one, emotional spending. Either
Yeah.
people are trying to spend this money to either help them grieve that they're celebrating the person's, it can go both directions on that. But they're looking for this immediate comfort, either positive or negative, from there. The other side of that is, some lack of planning. They haven't really set forth their expectation, on how to reduce their own debts, before an inheritance. And then all of a sudden they get this lump sum of money and it's like, what do we do with it? Do we put it here? Do we put that new pool in the backyard? Do we pay off our house? Do we pay off a college loan? What's our goal, overall, but there's no, actual plan that goes
Mhm.
into it initially.
Right. And I think you're touching on this already, but according to the study, they suggest the pattern is more extreme when it's an inheritance than other financial windfalls like the lottery. So why are inheritances different? What have you seen?
Right. It's, what we've seen over time is, a lot of impulse buying, from it. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of conversation that's happening between mom and dad or, the person that has passed away, if you're receiving it from an aunt and an uncle and kind of what those expectations are, what it took to save the money and, and especially what they expected to use the money for, to be able to have that freedom, in retirement and stuff, to do what they wanted to do. But, in case of falling back on it, they had that preserved money, in place to be able to carry on their standard of living. So,
Mhm.
it's unexpected, it's unearned money. So it's very easy, to spend. But it also depends on the type of money that you're getting. Are you the one spending it, or, is some of that money going to Uncle Sam? How is that being, planned out for? And, is there a more efficient way to get that money to you without getting into Uncle Sam's pocket?
Mhm. And on that note, you've been doing this for a while. So what mistakes do you see families make when it comes to passing down wealth?
Yeah, the first mistake I think is just having the conversation. A lot
Yeah.
of people try to avoid that conversation because it is difficult. It's not something fun to talk about. But understanding the purpose, of what that money is, and a 30,000 foot overview of kind of how it is, or what type of money it is at this point in time, I think is very important. Is it IRA money? Is it Roth IRA money? Is it non-qualified? Are you going to be taxed on it? Are you not? Not that the kid's going to expect this, but it could even come into play that later on in life, when mom and dad are no longer capable of managing that money,
Mhm.
how do that son or daughter, step into play and, continue on their wishes, through their life and into now distributing that money as the executor to the other beneficiaries.
Right,
I
right.
think that's, mistake number one. Mistake number two is, really starting to plan for some sort of an inheritance. And I don't mean plan for it in the sense of income, but plan for it in the sense of taxes and what you're going to do emotionally, with that money afterwards.
Right. So let's talk through some strategies then, because what would you recommend to a family just to help ensure that an inheritance does last?
Yeah, the first thing to do is pause.
Yeah.
Pause whether that money stays invested where it's at, put that money into a high yield, savings. Pause, right off the bat. There's a lot of emotional mistakes that happen very early on, and it gets spent very quick. It might be something. Hey, we've got a mortgage loan that we want to take the money out and we want to pay off this loan. Well, here a couple of years ago, a lot of people were refinancing those loans for very, very low rates. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to take inherited money and go out and pay off those very low rate, loans. It may make more sense to reinvest that money, get a higher interest rate for the money, and use that money to pay off the loans over time. A little interest rate arbitrage, could go a long way on this and extending that money, keeping it in your pocket, not in the bank's pocket.
Hmm.
So that's strategy number one. Number two, invest the money before spending it. There's always something, there's something new and shiny to buy all the time. It's real quick and easy to say, hey, I want to go put a pool in. I want to add on to the house. I want to pay off a college debt. I want to do all of this stuff, but invest back in yourself first, and then start spending it out, a little bit here and a little bit there. If you're having questions about it, using your professional advice, whether it's through a financial advisor, a CPA, or an attorney, with, making sure all your legal documents, what happens if mom and dad passes away and then unexpectedly, something happens to you and you don't have the wills or the trust or, power of attorney set up in place for your beneficiaries to be able to help manage this. Making sure you have that plan in place, is vitally important early on.
So much to consider. And of course, it all does come back to having a plan. And even though it gets kind of muddy because a lot of people don't like to talk about end of life stuff, it's so important to set your heirs up for success. So, Nick, if somebody would like to sit down with you, have that conversation, have you in the room while they have that conversation with a child or niece or nephew, can make it a lot easier. What's the best way to reach you? Yeah,
they can reach out to us online, ewgretire.com. Or just give us a phone call and you can set up a meeting that way, 937-498-1128. We can sit down, with you, with the beneficiaries, however you want to go about doing that to get a plan in place.
All right, Nick, thank you.
Thank you.